This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
Access to recording. So we're now recording. You should see a little recording like red dot on the screen. So for today, it's going to be two presenters. It's going to be myself, Bob Phillips, and Nitin. And just briefly, I've been working with Agile teams for over 10 years, and I've been very active with the PMI New Jersey chapter. And I've actually taught an ACP class for the chapter last December. And right now, I'm pretty much working with Agile teams in a coaching capacity and a Scrum Master. Nitin, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. I'm Nitin Khanna. I'm an Agile coach. I am the chairperson of the LCI, and got a lot of acronyms behind my name. I love to learn, love the certification, love the journey. I work with small teams in startup to teams at a program level and people getting into the enterprise. I've seen some wonderful teams do great hyper-productive work, and I've seen teams tank. Working in life sciences right now.
Okay, well, thanks, Nitin. So for today's agenda, what we're going to be covering, as was in the announcement, the first thing would be setting the correct expectation with your team and stakeholders. Then we're going to go into meeting cadence. And then basically I'm going to cover the top two topics, and then Nitin's going to take the lead on the last three as far as ways that you could potentially introduce agility. These, we're not saying these are the only ways, but ways you could. What it means to be a self-organized team, because a lot of times we talk about it, but what does it really mean? And then Nitin will finalize with psych profiles for teams. So let's get started. Basically, when you're working with Agile, there's always a question is, okay, I'm an Agile team, really, what does it mean? And this tree kind of was put together by Nitin and I when we did a main chapter presentation last year. And I basically added some words to the right of it. So pretty much when you're working with agility, it basically means that you're going to use the 4 Agile values, also known as the manifesto, basically. And that is used to how you're going to work with your customer or your stakeholders and how you're going to make decisions. So that's the basis. That's the roots of the tree that we're working with. Next up comes the principles. And basically there's 12 Agile principles. And what you do when you're an Agile team is you understand what they are and you agree to work and follow them. During today's presentation, we're not actually going to go into each of the individual values and principles, but this is an awareness, and there's a really good website from the founders of Agile called agilemanifesto.org. And basically it has the values and the principles that were written back in Snowbird, Utah in 2001. So next is the framework. So now you have people that are working with values and principles. Now, how do you enable those teams? And that's when it comes into play with the framework. So pretty much there's different frameworks available. Scrum happens to be the most popular, but there's other Agile frameworks called Kanban, Lean, Hybrid, or XP. And basically these frameworks are designed to allow you and your team to work using Agile values and principles. And then finally, the fun part is you get to leverage these really fun practices that make up that Agile teams follow. Key things would be continuous integration, meaning as your code is developed, your developers are merging the code into the source. So that way you don't wait till the end of your development cycle. You actually do it on a daily basis, or even better, do it every hour. As you do things, you integrate. And then basically you're running automated tests in the background, making sure that when you do this integration, you're not breaking something. And if you break it, you immediately fix it. Think about it. If you break something and you only do about an hour's worth of coding, think how easy it would be to fix that. Rather than if you had 2 weeks worth of coding and you broke something, you'd have to look back over the last 2 weeks to figure out what went wrong. There's other great practices that make up Agile, like pair programming, test-driven development, where you rate testing first, and the top thing there called self-organizing. That's something Nitin's going to touch on. And we designed these discussion groups to be interactive. So if anybody has any questions, if you could you can just say, hey, Bob, well, what about this? So I'm going to pause for a second before I go to the next slide. And what makes this great is everybody sharing. Now, if you're sending things over the chat, I don't have visibility because my screen's being shared. And Nitin, if you see anything that should be covered, let me know.
Yep, I'm keeping an eye on. Thanks, Bob.
All right, and now a lot of times when you're talking about Agile, everybody refers to lean Agile. And so now taking this tree, all trees sit in soil. So you can look at the soil being rooted upon lean values and principles. And that's really what agility is. And a lot of people get confused. They think if they just jump into Scrum, they're actually Agile, but there's really a lot more to it than just following the Scrum process. It's really made up of all these components that are really important. And if you're interested in lean, there's a great website that Craig Lumley put together for LESS, Large Scale Scrum, and it's less.works is the URL. And then on the main page, if you click on principles, you'll see some really good description about lean, the values and principles that make up lean. All right, now, so this is a Dilbert that happens a lot.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
All the examples I've ever seen, Agile is referenced with software development. Does it work for any project, or is it really mostly geared for software development projects?
It was originally designed for software, but if you follow Jeff Sutherland, he's got a book called Doing Work in Half the Time. You'll see that it's being used and leveraged by other areas. So it's not just limited to software. It's a framework that allows teams to work better together. Unfortunately, the way the manifesto was written, it was written with the word software in it. Using those software terms, because that's where these experts came together in Snowbird, Utah. But it can be used in other areas as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And so I'm not going to read the cartoon to you, but this happens a lot. You're in an organization, the executives say, okay, we're going to be Agile now, and that's basically it. And then everybody thinks, oh, Agile, oh, okay, that means no documentation, we just write code. But that's where things go wrong, and that's where things get very messy very fast. So now, in order to get started, there's some key things that, like I just finished helping a team get initialized. They're a team that's in upstate New York. And after I completed my training, I try to give the team about 5 to 6 hours worth of training, and then basically set them free so they can start sprinting. A lot of teams don't think they're ready, but my advice would always be just get started, just try it. And that's what it's really all about. And so before you kind of let the team go, basically, you have to make sure, number one, that the people there respect each other. And respect is one of the Scrum values. We're not going to, cover that today, but this is like the core. If you have a team working together and they don't respect each other, you're not going to accomplish very much. That's just a given. The next would be, does your product owner and the management team support continuous learning? Because an Agile team, for them to really succeed, is they have to have an environment where they're enabled to learn. And so what we do with my team, where I am, is on Fridays, we tell them you should definitely dedicate some time to learning, learning Java, learning software skills. And you want to schedule that. You want to basically plan your day that way so that you actually have that time. If you don't schedule it, something else will come around. And so we do that on a weekly basis. We tell them every Friday we want you to spend a few hours, on continuous learning. The next would be, you have to, after you've explained the values and principles, your team has to have a desire actually to follow the Agile values and principles. So it's definitely a different way of working. Some people like to be told what to do. And if you have team members that really don't want to be self-organizing, again, we're going to get to that later, and they don't want to be Agile pretty much using the values and principles, you might want to take a step back and think, okay, maybe this, maybe this isn't an Agile team. So you want to have that basic understanding. The next would be taking them through the Scrum framework. And basically the framework includes the 3 roles, the events, and the artifacts. So you have to have a team that understands what they are in order to start. And then there's the idea of Scrum butts. And that's where, okay, we're an Agile team, we're following Scrum, but we don't want to spend time on the retrospective, this time. We're going to skip it. Or we don't really need a daily Scrum. I've heard that a lot. Like, why do we have to meet every day? Why can't we just meet Mondays, Wednesdays, or Fridays? I'm sure if you people have been in, working with teams, you've heard that as well. Or, maybe we should just meet once a week. Why do we have to meet daily? But that 15-minute daily Scrum meeting is so important, where basically it gets the team together and they actually plan their work for the day. It sounds like it's pretty amazing that you can do all that in 15 minutes, but if it's done right, you can. All right, and now the other thing I wanted to point out is when you're working with Agile teams, well, before I go forward, is there any questions about what I shared so far? Okay. So now basically, you're going to be dealing with, in your organization, people with a waterfall mindset. And pretty much waterfall is a typical development methodology that's been around for years, where basically you fix your scope, you estimate your cost, and then you estimate the time. Pretty much you spend all your time up front getting a really beautiful, detailed requirements document that's hundreds of pages long. And then basically after you get that from the customer, the development team would basically estimate how long and estimate how much it will cost to actually get that done. And then there's this quality dimension in the middle. That would be your typical waterfall project. And people are comfortable with that because they actually think they're going to get what they ask for. But a lot of times waterfall projects don't make it. I'm not saying waterfall is bad for everything. There's sometimes waterfall makes sense, but you can't really think that far in advance to actually document all the requirements. So on an Agile project, you're actually taking this iron triangle and turning it upside down. Where basically now, instead of fixing your scope, you're actually fixing your cost and fixing your time. So what, and for me, for budgeting, I love Agile teams because pretty much I can say, I need 5 people in Jersey City to work through the end of the year, all right? I know my time period, I know what my cost is. That's it. It's really impossible to go over budget on an Agile project because basically you have 5 people. You're going to be paying for those people. So that's the beauty of it this way. Now the problem is, or I should say what the difference is now it's the scope. You're not really fixing it anymore. You're estimating what could be done with these 5 people over a year. And that's what the whole Agile framework, and one of them is Scrum, helps you do, where basically you have a product owner who would actually help you estimate, help the team put together what it is they want to build, and the team would basically help the product owner come up with how much time it would take to build these types of features, so you could start getting an idea as far as what could be delivered over this time period. And then again on this, the quality dimension stays the same. It's in the middle. But what you find on an Agile project is quality is higher because you're not waiting to the end to do all your testing. Like right now, my team is delivering new functionality to our customer every day, not in production, in a test environment. And the customer is very eager, and they've actually been testing it and giving us feedback every day. So if you think about it, we're getting daily feedback. So of course our quality is going to be much higher than if we waited 6 months and then did all the testing at the end. Okay, any questions about what I just covered so far? All right. The next is the division of responsibilities. And it all really starts with the development team. And they're basically on the bottom, they're the foundation. And they're basically responsible for the quality of the system, continuously improving themselves, and delivering value. And so when the product owner gives them work, They want to make sure that they deliver in high quality. They're always looking for ways to improve. The next level would be the Scrum Master and the Product Owner. And again, I'm describing the Scrum framework here. And so pretty much the Scrum Master is accountable for the process and keeping the team happy. And the Product Owner on the other side they're responsible for the ultimate value delivery. And then a methodology they could use is what they call a release plan. And the Product Owner does all the status reporting. So there's really no project manager in this picture when you're following Scrum. A lot of times the Product Owner will ask the Scrum Master to help them with the release plan and with status reporting, because the Product Owner is the hardest job on the team. And then I've talked with different organizations where they say, oh, we don't need a Scrum Master, or the Scrum Master could be somebody that fills in. And that basically is, you're not going to get the full value out of having an Agile team, because the Scrum Master is the person that works with the team looking for ways to help the team improve. I'll give you an example. Last year I had a 5 or 6 person team. Arbitrarily, let's say their velocity was 30 points a sprint. So every sprint they were delivering 30 points. After about 5 months, through retrospectives and working with them, their velocity increased to 70 or 80 points a sprint. So basically, they're able to actually accomplish more than twice the work in the same period of time while keeping quality. Now, if they did not have a full-time Scrum Master, the team would have lost out on that. Because if you just have somebody filling in, all they're going to do is go through the mechanical events, and they're not going to be looking at the team as far as what the whole process is and how to improve it. So then the next level and the last level here is you have 2 types of stakeholders. You have stakeholders from the business, and you have stakeholders from technology. And basically the business is the one that's driving the product owner to actually make sure that what's being built is meeting their needs and is providing value. And basically the product owner should be working with them, and it should be in a mode of asking the team, not telling the team, because that's where you get the power of an Agile team, because you're getting all this creativity by asking them. Nobody really wants to be told what to do. They want to be asked, and basically that's how you drive innovation. And then the technology stakeholders, usually these people are the managers of the developers and stuff like that. They want to enable the team by empowering it and also reinforcing the ask the team. They also can help quite a bit when there's any blockers, because they're the ones that are connected high up in the organization to help the team get through it. And then this whole terminology called a servant leader, where they're there as more of an enabler. They're there to help the team members do their job better. They get out of the mode of command and control and telling the team what to do. Is there any questions? All right. All right, now we have the Scrum framework. You've seen this before, and I'm not going to take you through every single component of this, but this is a chart that I think would be really helpful because again, when you're getting started, or if you're following it, or if you're following Scrum, you may not quite understand, what the cadence is and how this should be set up. So basically, on the right-hand side, the cadence is as needed, and basically this is your product backlog, and this is showing who does it, the product owner and the Scrum Master, and basically these 2 people are responsible for helping the backlog get created, and that's basically the work that the team's going to be completing in the future. They're also responsible for driving product backlog refinement meetings, where you're constantly looking in the backlog for work you might be doing in the next month or so, and getting it more and more refined. You don't want to go into the backlog and refine 100% for the whole year, because you'll end up doing a lot of waste, because things will change. So you'll want to keep maybe 30, 45 days of stuff that in your backlog that's pretty well refined. The next is the same day. And this is a very busy day in Scrum. This is like you could call it your big Scrum event day, where basically it would start out with your sprint planning meeting, where the Scrum Master would actually schedule and facilitate it. There's actually 2 planning meetings if you're doing Scrum correctly. The first one is with your stakeholders and your product owner and anybody that's interested, where basically you're planning what you'd like the team to do next. Then basically the next area here is the sprint backlog. This is an artifact. In between here with the sprint planning, as I said, there's planning 1 and 2 meetings. During the planning 2 meeting, the team takes a look at what the business wants, and then that's where they volunteer and they actually commit to actually doing it in the sprint. So this happens on the same day. So basically you have a sprint planning meeting. What I usually try to do is I do sprint planning part 1 with the business, then I'll do my retrospective, and then I'll do my sprint planning part 2, because I like to take the input that I get from my retrospective and have the team enable to do their planning part 2 with that. And then that's up here, this retrospective here. And that's basically, that happens the same day as well. And then finally, you would do your sprint review. So tying it all together on the same day, we do, let's say we just did a sprint. The first meeting I would have that day would be the sprint review meeting, basically where the team would demonstrate what they delivered. Right after that, we have everybody, the same audience there. We do the sprint planning meeting. And then basically that's usually maybe 2 hours, 1 hour for each meeting. Could be 90 minutes, really depending on how much work the team is actually doing and delivering. Then I schedule a retrospective where basically the team will look and reflect as far as what they delivered and over the last 2 weeks in the sprint, if the sprint was in a 2-week duration. Then I would go into the sprint planning part 2 meeting. After the retrospective, maybe give like an hour break, and then basically from there you end up with a backlog. And so that's pretty much what the cadence is. And once you start sprinting, the Scrum Master would schedule a daily Scrum meeting, and this meeting really is just for the development team. The Scrum Master does not need to attend. The product owner does not need to attend. It's really for the developers. This is their meeting. Is there any questions about that?
Yes, I do. This is Bhaskar. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What we do actually, we do the sprint backlog after the previous sprint is closed and the retro is done. As you mentioned, that retro you do just to figure out that what has to go in the sprint backlog depending on the feedback from the team. So also we take into account that we close the sprint first, so that whatever work we could not complete, that goes to the next following sprint, because that determines the capacity. So is that the right process, or anything else you would like to suggest?
What are you having 2 sprint planning meetings? Are you doing like a part 1 with the business and then a part 2 with the developers?
Actually, the product backlog, we don't do necessarily on the same day. We do at least take a couple of times, 2-3 times, depending on the depth of the backlog. I mean, we try to keep it about 4 sprint depth. If so, we continuously do it. So basically 2 or 3 days within the sprint, 2-week sprint, we have the product backlog grooming. So that is separate. On that day, we do only with the developers on the sprint backlog. That's what we are doing.
Let me chime in very quickly, Bhaskar. I think from what I got from you, and I agree, basically when your sprint closes, at your review, there's some work that's lingering or pending. You could easily just move it on to the next sprint, and that's what most people do, and most teams do that because they just want to wrap that up.
Right, but that's the product owner's decision. If a team doesn't complete something, the product owner can decide, I don't want that anymore. There's something more important to do. And we could talk a little bit offline about what you're doing. Because based on what I'm hearing, it doesn't, you want to try to do all these events in the same day. I know with time zones it's difficult, because this is a heavy meeting day. And the way you look at it is when the developers are in meetings, they're not coding, all right? So you want to try to accomplish these meetings as best you can in the same day. Sometimes, you may drag into the next morning, but ideally you want to try to get, your sprint planning, your sprint review, your retro all done, and then have the dev team commit to the sprint backlog and have that completed. So that way the product owner can give the green light to start the sprint. And now what you talked about with the product backlog, that happens constantly in the background. The backlog is owned by your product owner, and the product owner gets a lot of input from the dev team. Hopefully, they're working really closely together. And those meetings can occur on an ad hoc basis. There's really no set schedule. It's really at a level where the product owner is comfortable. When I'm first starting a team, I recommend maybe 2 product backlog refinement meetings a week until the backlog gets sufficient enough, and then maybe do it once every 2 weeks. Again, this is just what I've been experiencing working with my team. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. So probably what you are suggesting, and we'll try that out definitely, that is try 2 planning meeting, one with the business, and then later on final planning meeting will be only with the developers, where we create the actual sprint backlog.
Yes.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you.
Sure.
Oscar, just Google or look at the Scrum Guide also at the 2 parts of sprint planning. And it's clearly laid out over there, just those 2 distinctions and the value.
Sure, thank you.
When I first got started with this, I used to get confused over the sprint backlog and the product backlog, because I'm like, wait a minute, it's a backlog. It's really that differential is the sprint backlog is what the dev team commits to, and the product backlog is basically everything that's not done yet. So, that's how I separate it in my mind now. All right. So basically, real quick to summarize what I just shared with everybody, this is something that you could use to see how you're following Scrum, or if you're starting brand new. You want to basically identify a product owner, Scrum Master, and dev team members. I find, based on the latest research, that they say 4.6 is the best size of a dev team. And I round that up to 5, and I find 5 people is the best. If you start getting bigger, you're increasing your communication channels, and you eventually end up slowing yourself down because there's too many people and too much communication to manage. A lot of times I'll hear, oh, the management wants 10 people on the team, and I always push back and say 5 is the magic number, and it really is. The next would be the Scrum Master would work with the product owner to create the backlog. And Jira is probably the most commonly used tool. There's other tools out there. Some people use a spreadsheet. I'm not saying you should use Jira, but if it's available, it's a great tool. It gives you a lot of ways to organize the data and actually make it transparent and make it visible. I already touched on this about multiple product backlog refinement meetings to get it built up. And then basically, as you're working with the product owner, you want to basically know if there's a who, what, and why in the description, and what the acceptance criteria is. If you have this information in your backlog item, you would have enough for the dev team to start working on it. If you don't have this information, it's something the dev team should actually bring back to the product owner and say, we need to refine this more. You just keep on refining it until you have the who, what, and the why and acceptance criteria. We use Jira, and I really like Confluence because it's a great tool for it's like a wiki, but it's like a website wiki. It's very, very, very powerful as far as sharing information. The team would then create a definition of done. And again, like Nitin referred to, that description would be in the Scrum Guide. And this is something that you would work together with the product owner, with the dev team and the product owner to come up with what it is, what does an item have to have in order to be called done. Next is you would establish team norms. Like, what do we do if a person's always late? Like, how do we manage that? Give you a really quick story. When I was on a previous team, we had somebody that kept on coming late. We started out charging people $1 for being late. That didn't seem to stop it. We upped it to $3. That didn't seem to stop it. Finally went to $5. And when we hit the $5 mark, the person stopped being late, because what was happening was we had a cookie jar that they would put the money in, and that money would actually go towards snacks for the team. So it's just how our team decided to manage it. And again, this was a local team, so it's easier to do that when everybody's co-located. Team agreements, how the team agrees to handle certain things. Like if the PO is not available, what are we going to do? These are all things that you should basically establish before you get started, before you run into problems. What your cadence would be. It seems like the average sprint length is 2 weeks. I have been going back and forth between 2 and 3 weeks, depending on the work that the team is doing. Right now, my team is doing 3-week sprints. But prior to that, we were doing 2. So it's really up to the team. But if you're going to get started, start with 2. See what happens. Have your retrospective. And
Just to supplement what you're saying, Bob, industry trends are telling us the most common are 2 weeks, then 3, then 4, and then 1.
And that makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, if you do a 1-week sprint, I just showed you a picture where you're having all those meetings in one day, all right? So now you have a 1-week sprint, and that means you only have 4 days to actually do work. So that's why it kind of reinforces what Nitin just said as far as the survey that he referred to. And then basically business is always looking for, like, when am I going to get something? And this is called a release plan. And I came up with a concept of creating placeholder sprints where you can actually, where the product owner can drag things in to future sprints that are coming up. And then that way you can start mapping it out if you know the team's velocity. And then finally, this is the regular events that were on a picture, but this is in words. Sprint planning is basically the Scrum team, and that would include the SMEs and the main stakeholders. Sprint planning part 2 is the dev team and Scrum Master only, and it's optional for the PO and SMEs. The daily Scrum is 15 minutes, and that there's no reason why it should be more than 15 minutes, which is why you also want to keep the team small. Like if you have a 10 or 15 person team, it gets a little, what's the right word? Everybody's eyes start glazing over because it's just too much information, too much being presented. But if there's only 5 people, it goes really quick. You don't have a daily Scrum meeting during the big Scrum event day. The sprint review, basically this is when you show off what you did. That's everybody, including the key stakeholders. The retrospective, and basically you want to have this before you do sprint planning, part 2, because that basically helps the team. And then this is an optional thing that basically the Scrum guide doesn't really call out, but it's an optional best practice where basically PBR stands for product backlog refinement. And it's where you're actually looking at things in your backlog and constantly grooming it. So was there any other questions? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nitin.
Thanks, Bob. So we've covered a lot with Scrum, with the roles, the events, the artifacts. How do you get this into a team or an organization? There are about 3 ways that I will touch upon. The first one is top-down. This is known as a push system as well. And you typically have C-level folks or executives or people who attended either a webinar or a session and say, you know what, we're going agile, we're doing this. So it's a push. And this isn't necessarily a negative or a bad thing. We've seen some white papers on success on this as well. So Salesforce.com is classic. They had the entire organization very quickly go agile. It wasn't really overnight, it was like a weekend thing, but there's a great white paper there as well in the slide share. Now, when you're pushing this, do expect resistance to change. Not everybody might be on board. But towards the end, when people start seeing the benefits and seeing the magic, they were asked or surveyed, would you do this again? And most of them said yes. So it's a light read. If you get a chance, take a look. And a lot of scaling models are getting to be top down as well, because you do need the buy-in of a lot of people. So just keep that in mind. So after top down, I'll have you transition, Bob. There's bottom up. What is that? That's just something very organic. You take one initiative with one team and you do an experiment. And I worked with a wealth management company right here in New Jersey. And it was great because they just wanted to give this a try. They co-located the folks. And it was a very simple project that had to be done by the end of the year, end of the financial year as well. And the great thing is they said, hey, this is cool. This can work. And the company has just gone into doing more of agility. And that's a lot of what they do right now. So it's always going to be organic. Keep that in mind. People are going to learn, and there isn't as much as pressure or a push from the top. And the third thing is to become an agile ninja, where you disappear. This is where the message is important, not necessarily the messenger. A lot of people are intimidated by formal terminology. A lot of people are still not as enticed by agility. They think it's hype, it's a fad. So what you do is you plant seeds along the way. And a classic example that I've used is I was working with someone and I had a great mentor, and he wanted to go to people and say, hey, can we try something with Agile? And they said, no, we can't do that. We've got a lot of compliance. We have to be risk averse. And then he went back another time and said, how about Scrum? Because that's one of the flavors of agility. A lot of companies are doing it. We've got white papers and documentation. And it was no. And then just hit the click, Bob, and you'll see the third time he went around and said, well, what about iterative development? Click, click. And they said, what's that? And he got their attention. He said, well, it's about getting something to you in about 2 weeks just to get a preview and see how we're doing, whether we're on the right track, instead of waiting maybe 3 months, 6 months down the line for feedback. How does that sound? Like, yeah, we like the sound of that. Can we have these checkpoints every 2 weeks, really? Yeah, if you're open to it. And this is introducing it in a light way without intimidation and stealth. There are times I go in as an Agile coach and I just raise questions and I let the Scrum Masters just run with that. So again, we're not having the messengers take credit or be as important as the message itself. Google tried this years ago as an experiment. There's a great YouTube video as well with Ken Schreiber coming on campus and talking a little bit more about it. So if you're in an organization that is resisting a few things, just know it could be an uphill battle, but you could still be planting seeds. Let's move on ahead, Bob. So with this, we've talked a little bit about self-organizing teams, and we don't want to be pushed. We want to be asking people their opinion. What does that really mean? Because we don't have this formally defined in Scrum, and that's actually a great thing. So when you work with change agents in an organization, such as your Scrum Masters, they will usually get to 3 things: team norms, team agreements, and a conflict resolution model. And if you were to ever interview a potential Scrum Master for your team or organization, I would try to see if they could hit upon these 3 things now. So let's look at a few examples. Move ahead, Bob. Consider the following. I went into a new team that was just starting up, and I had a simple exercise for them. I said, hey, how do you want to work with me? And I got a lot of blank stares. I said, look, I'm new to this team. I'm new to this company. I'm an external consultant. You don't know me. And perhaps you could just use these sticky notes and write something up there and how you want to work with me. It took a while, but they came up with something. And then I simply turned it around and say, well, now that you know how you want to work with me, how do you want to work with each other? Because this is a group of people who have been working on a multitude of initiatives. And they like this exercise. And we came up with a few things like, hey, with patience, with respect, be able to offer help and receive help. Some of the funny things I saw in a note was help a brother out, because sometimes people get overwhelmed. And this is going to give you the pulse of the team. It'll do a good check to see how do these people work well together, or what could be a threat to some of the team dynamics. Next slide, Bob. And after that, you come with some working agreements. In almost every Agile team, be it Scrum or elsewise, you're going to be seeing a few scenarios that will repeat. Like Bob said, what happens if you're late for your daily Scrum? One team said, just start. No waiting. We've got 15 minutes. We're tight on time. Just start. Now, this team might want to just start, but another one might have something else. That's their team agreement. Same thing for some other things. What happens if the product owner is unavailable for the review? What do we do with sprint work emerging in the middle of things, be it defects, high priority items, requests from the outside? And I bet you're going to see some other observations. And if you could tune into this a little bit on the onset or the team formations, or even today, if you haven't got something like this, it's going to do really well into resolving conflict and making teams a little bit more effective. So the next slide gets into some sort of a conflict resolution model. There are many out there. You don't have to pick this. Work with something that can reflect, acknowledge, and thereafter which people would be willing to act. A lot of times people don't know where they are in their journey or what's happening. If we could somehow reflect this, typically in retrospective or quick team huddle, and say, hey, where are we with this? Or what's happening in this sprint? Or what happened to this user story, for example? And this is where we're at. That does a lot for the team. And you might even have people in opposition there, and then you get to why they are thinking so differently. And you just reflect it in the model. So these three things are really key in getting into self-organizing. If your Scrum Master is not available for some reason, but you have these three things, the team can still do quite well. So next slide, Bob. So before I get into some tools a coach can use, because this is getting a little bit more into human nature and psych profiles, any questions on self-organizing or the three things that I touched upon?
Just one comment on our practice, and just wanted to verify, is that right or not? What we try to do when we build a team, as you mentioned, it takes some time because all are new. We don't change the team members. I mean, we know their skill set, if that is required. Then we move the work from one group to another group, but we try to keep the team intact. So that's one practice we do. I don't know whether that is right or not. Just wanted to verify.
That works really well, and that is encouraged. As long as you have what you said, a cross-functional team that has the skill sets and they can lean on each other. There's something called T-shaped skills, where if you can imagine stretching your arms out and I become like the letter T, I can kind of touch my person on one side or the other, and I'm deep and focused on my skill set. So you can lean on each other this way. Remember, Ken Schwaber, Jeff Sutherland came from the armed services. Two heads are better than one, a small group better than a massive one. You're really working as a unit of one because projects come and go. So, Bhaskar, I think you're doing your team and your department and organization a great favor and a service if you are doing this. And my next example is going to touch a little bit upon this and some of the psychodynamics there as well. So it's a great practice. If anybody, you can keep your team together That's an awesome thing. So let me get into something called StrengthsFinder. This is a beautiful psych profile where your top 5 strengths are revealed. We focus a lot with, hey, you know, where can I improve? What could I get as a new skill set? But oftentimes we have not reflected on our strengths. And could we identify them and could we use them to thrive? Why not just go with that? It's quite economical. You could get this assessment for maybe $10 a person if you do it in the corporate way. Otherwise, maybe it's like 15, 20 bucks now. It's by the late Dr. Clifton and Tom Roth. Next slide, Bob. And this might seem a little dense, and I've used it in our other sessions as well, but you get a few broad categories of strengths. And it's not to say we don't touch upon these areas, but this profile will help you understand where you are the strongest. So for example, you have people who can execute well, to people who can influence, to people who are really good with connections and relationship building, and then strategic thinking. And if you have a team that has these buckets in them and within them, you're going to do really well. So if you were to look at executing, you have a few strengths or categories as defined as people who are achievers, people who can arrange things, people with a belief system, being consistent, and so on and so forth, all the way down. This grade, this is an actual team that I was a part of. We had 5 members, and we said, you know, what are our strengths? What are we good at? So I sat down one-on-one with each person, and I first asked them, does this make sense to you? And what has been revealed? And they said, yes, this is me. This really does make sense. I said, okay, what if we map this out to your team now? So for example, member 4, NK, my initials, my top strength is connectedness. I like to have deep, meaningful connection with people. After that, number 2 is harmony. I don't like conflict. I like people to be getting along and looking at the positive. My wife thinks that I see life as a bed of roses without the thorns. And that's number 3 also, positivity. My 4th one is intellection, which means I'm always thinking about things, even when I'm driving in the car, and I'm thinking of ideas and revolutionary ideas and what's the next big tech thing. And I'm always a learner. You'll see the acronyms of letters behind my name with all the certifications. I'm always learning something new. If it's not agile, it could be flashlights. It could be tires. It could be the Internet of Things. I'm always learning. So this person, such as me, may not come across well as executing or influencing, but has got very strong skills in relationship building and strategic thinking. And if I were to just disappear for 2 weeks, what would happen? That's a question. So I took at member 2 just as an example. If member 2 suddenly took off, there's really nothing in influencing. So they're not here who could negotiate things with a product owner or with business stakeholders. They could be charming. These might be people who are not in a position of power, but they still have great negotiation skills. And all of a sudden, this team would lack that for some time. And for others to step up into that role, and it's not to say we can't do that, it's not their core strength. And when revealed to this team, they said, yep, that makes sense. What about team member number 4 was just me? So that would be the next slide. So as you see, I've got this black highlight there. And if you notice, within this grid, there are people who can execute, influence, build relationships, and be strategic thinkers. I might at some point be able to wean myself off this team as an external consultant, coach, team member, and see if this team could continue, and they did. So, hey, yeah, Nitin, you've requested some time off for 2 weeks. I'm not sure you can do that. Well, I went to the site profile and it said it could. Who knows? Let's look at the next slide. No, I didn't try that. All right, so let me pause on that. There are several psych models out there, but I'm going to give it back to Bob. Any questions on what I presented? I know it's very quick, but we also want to give you some time for questions and answers.
All right, just to kind of summarize this, when organizations embark on an agile journey, they usually bring in coaches and they usually do a lot of training. So basically, it all starts out with the core of agile, where pretty much everything's done well. If you brought the right people in, teams are going pretty strongly. Now, basically, they start creating their own rituals, basically. So now this first team comes in, they know what they're supposed to do, but then they say, look, we're going to do this and this and the other thing. And then before you know it, things start spreading out. So now all of a sudden you have this core of agile and it's now dispersed between the second team, the third team. And then basically it goes on and on until you basically have a little bit of a mess on your hands. And that's why, what everybody on this call is doing is really great, because what we're hoping to provide you with is ways to make sure, like what you just learned today could be used as a guideline. You can go back to your organization and say, okay, how are we doing Scrum? Are we doing everything that Bob and Nitin described? Are our teams self-organizing? Are we telling our teams what to do? So those are all the things that will help you pull back into the core of Agile. And that's basically the role of an Agile coach, where they can actually come in, help the Scrum Masters, help the product owner, and help the team, start coming in, start embracing the core of Agile again. So pretty much that summarizes what we just spoke about. And now we go into Q&A. And this has been a very quiet group tonight, but hopefully you're able to take something you can bring back to your organization.
Just one comment. I mean,
plunging into a frigid lake St. Clair, losing your footing while fishing, falling from the dock into the 36-degree water. Police and 2 other fishermen pulling their out authorities warning about dangers of fragile ice with fluctuating temperatures. And to break in, Billy Joel's
I think someone's background on a GPS or weather element is on. Maybe they've unmuted by accident. But I think Bhaskar was talking. Bhaskar, was that you talking or trying to get a question?
I was trying to speak. I stopped because I thought another gentleman is trying to say something.
Yeah, that's fine. I think they're on mute now. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks to Nitin, he suggested me to take a SAFE training, so which I did. So since we are talking about moving a little more deeper into Agile, I think SAFE is a good, great way to get a little more inside this. So my question is, are we going to talk about SAFE later on, that how that things are intertwined between project management and SAFE, and whether that is advisable, since we are talking about the trainings and events?
That's a good question. Let me share my thoughts on that, Oscar, and then Bob will also chime in for sure. There are a multitude of scaling flavors out there. Some of the lesser known ones are Less or Large Scale Scrum by Craig Larman and Bus Bodie that have been here for over a decade. And there's tremendous support for that flavor, particularly in New York City, and with meetups and Craig Larman himself coming in. Unfortunately, I think Less did not do as well as a marketing job as SAFE with the Skilled Agile Academy. We also have the Scaled Professional Scrum, or Nexus, through scrum.org, which is overlooked also with the backing of Ken Schwaber. We also have Scrum at Scale through Scrum Inc., and Dr. Jeff Sutherland was our guest speaker last year, and it was a great turnout and very insightful as well. SAFE continues to be enticing because of the levels it has, and this is now opinion. I'm a former SBC, So SAFE program consultant go in, implement at the portfolio levels. I could have been training people and certifying them as well. I have that experience, and most recently, SAFE has also moved to SAFE 5.0. So a lot of people are getting back over there. We do have some people who are trying to present on SAFE through the LCI, but I think practically, again, because we just had the move to SAFE 5.0, they're figuring out some of the nuances there as well. But we'll look into it. We want to look into scaling as well, and SAFE is certainly something we can consider. Bob, did you have anything?
No, you covered it quite well. And actually, PMI, we had a course last year on SAFE. It was on 4.5, the SAFE Agilist. It was a PMI New Jersey sponsored course. We had about 30 people attend. Right now we're planning just to do PMI ACP training because that's the certifications. But that's something that, we're going to keep in mind and keep on the radar.
So Bob, the ACP class, is there a cost for that, and what would it be?
It's on the PMI New Jersey website.
Mm-hmm.
And, right now we didn't make the page go live yet, but it's depending on when you register, it could be it'll be under 500. But again, I don't have the numbers right in front of me. We're going to have the same pricing that we had last year. If you register early, you definitely save money.
Okay.
With the early bird. And the way we're setting that course up is it's 1 day classroom, and then the rest of it would be through the web. And what that does is it gives you the ability to choose when you want to do the training. So you get your classroom education. It gives you a great start. It gives you a good overview of the course. And then the online training, it's basically done by a great PM, John Stenbach. He actually presented at one of our chapter it was either IPM Day or the May Symposium, I'm not really sure which one. But that's basically, it's course material that's available. It'll prepare you so that you could take the test. Does anybody else have any other questions? We have 2 more minutes until we formally complete the meeting. And then Nitin and I are going to stay on for another 15 minutes if there's anybody that wants to, have questions that might not pertain to this presentation or just general Agile questions. And I'm going to stop the recording at that time as well.
Oh, hi, Bob. This is Steve Albrecht. Great presentation, both you and Nitin. But I was wondering about a point you made early on that like a core value of the team is continuous learning. So I'm very much a neophyte when it comes to Agile and Lean, very interested in it. But I was curious about whose responsibility is it for continuous learning? I realize it's a self-managed team and the individuals must, step up, if you will, and, be excited and, and embrace learning and change and new ideas and, building their own knowledge. But is it the responsibility of the product owner or the stakeholders or the Scrum Master to sort of help the team, fashion a development plan? And is a development plan part of a Scrum, not even a Scrum, but an Agile thought process or management? I was just wondering what your opinions or practices.
Sure. This is one of the things where, it's a lot of organizations are saying we don't need Scrum Masters, but what I do as part of my retrospective is I spend 15 minutes doing what I call Agile learning, and then that then can go into other things. I also do like what they call lunch and learns that make the Agile learning available, and I'm always learning something new, and I'm always bringing it back to the team. So I'll schedule those sessions, on the Agile side. I'll make recommendations to team members if they want to further their learning. When it comes to developer skills, like, programming skills and things like that, it's really the employee's responsibility. But what happens is in an Agile organization, their manager is basically like a servant leader or an enabler. So they basically enable the person to to do that training. Like where I work, you do a development plan at the beginning of the year, where basically you say, okay, I want to, get these skills. And then you work with your manager and come up with, okay, to get these skills, is it online? Do I have to send you to a course? And basically the product owner has the money, and, the product owner should have some money in the budget for that, for team learning types of things. Because when I was working with my product owner in the last project, there were some things I wanted to do, that things that Nitin was introducing, and a lot of really interesting stuff that you can do to have the team look deeper into themselves. So you basically work with the product owner to get that money, but it's really between the employee and their manager, and with the support of the product owner. I hope I didn't give you too much information, and I answered your question.
No, that's a great answer. And I was just wondering, so the Scrum Master does or could in this practice talk to the tech manager about, perhaps this team member, should look at these areas for development, whether it's technical or non-technical, correct?
Yes, I have. The Scrum Master is like the eyes and ears for the product owner and the managers. And basically, of course, you don't do it behind somebody's back. You say, hey, I'm going to recommend to your manager that you do this and this. I think that would really help you a lot. And then basically you have that relationship, and that's what makes the team powerful. Because the minute people feel that the organization is looking out for them and trying to help them improve, they're going to be more dedicated, and you're going to have less and less turnover. And so it's like a win-win. Yes, training does cost money, but it costs a lot more money to replace somebody that quits. So there's trade-offs.
So great answer. Thanks.
Could also just supplement what Bob said with just one or two quick comments. I do agree. I believe the individual is responsible for their learning and growth, and then there's the organization that can also be held responsible. But Scrum Master can also make things a little bit more tangible, saying, hey, besides being the eyes and ears, can we have a spike or a learning type story and put it in the backlog? And maybe we won't do it in the next sprint, but maybe in the second sprint, it's kind of lingering there so that it's visible to the organization, to the team, to the product owner, that this team wants to learn or discover something. And you could time box that or put a weight on it as well. And just say, if we spend X amount of time on such and such, it might take a little bit away from the product development for the time being, but it's going to help us with other areas, other features, and so on. So your Scrum Master can actually make things a little bit more tangible if they have the support of the organization. And I'm going to go a little off tangent with another example. I was having some HVAC issues. My thermostat was acting weird. I had a technician come in, and he was amazing. And he says, you know what? I am Nest certified. I am what's called a Nest Pro installer. My company doesn't need me to be a pro installer. I just did it on my own because it's a popular product. It's out there. I'm going to be running into it. And it makes my life a little easier. Well, and I enjoy this. And I commended him. I said, wow, that's really cool, that you can do that in your own time and initiative. And it's the same thing. You're going to find some people out there in your team that will have that mindset, that they will take the time to learn a few things. And I would just encourage that. And if you top it off, if you got an organization that could help, you just have to figure out how to weave it into the team. So again, I'm blabbering now, but you know that I have a Nest thermostat in my home now.
If I could ask just a quick follow-up though, it does sound like there's an aspect of what is good for the team. And I know we touched on this a little bit, like I think a best practice or the outlook is that you want to sort of keep the teams together if you can. So it sounds like some of the development plans or some of the learning that might be encouraged, and again, if the team member is up for it, may be focused on the functionality of the team. Is that correct? Or the needs of the team, I should say.
Basically, you look at the work that's in front of them, and you might be identifying new technology and new skills that are needed. So you're definitely looking at the team, because the team is self-organized and supposed to be protecting itself. they're supposed to be helping each other. Like there's people that might have higher levels of skills, so they can actually help the person. If they have Java questions, they could do what you call pair programming, where they could say, okay, we're going to work on this story together and program in pairs. So there's different ways of accomplishing that goal. But when you're dealing with an Agile team, it all starts with the team. And
Right. Okay.
It's so important that the team feels safe. The minute they start feeling that their job is in jeopardy, everybody starts putting up their fences and walls, and a lot less work gets done because everybody's worrying about, who's going to be next to get fired, right? It's a horrible feeling. So
Right.
you want to create a very safe environment for everybody.
Thanks.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording, and now we're I'm sorry we went a little bit over, but we did end.